So I really wasn't sure what I was going to talk about because, I have prepared things that I just kind of keep in my notes that I can pull up and say, I'll read this testimony or a devotional I prepared for a women's retreat or what have you. But in talking about God's provision and some things that were said today on the call, it just kind of resonated with me that I can look back and see God's provision in my life, even in times when I wasn't really even knowing that I needed it. So let me just give a little bit of background. So my parents divorced when I was 3. My mom took my brother and my dad took me, which is pretty uncommon, especially in the 70s. So I was raised by a single dad. And in that, I can look and see God's provision with families in the church. There was one time when I was in 2nd grade, it was picture day, and my dad always did my hair. And my dad would do my hair the exact same way he did his hair, combed over, parted on the side and combed over. And so I was this little girl that I had longer hair, but my dad combed my hair exactly the same way he combed his hair and used the same exact hairspray on me that he used on him, White Rain with the green bottle. And I mean, I can still smell it to this day. So 2nd grade comes and it's picture day, and we're part of a carpool. And my dad drops me off at carpool, and the lady whose house I went to had 2 daughters. She and her husband had 2 daughters, and she asked me if she could do my hair, and I was ecstatic. So she did my hair for picture day, and I had cute little curls, and it was just something I wasn't accustomed to. That was God's provision. And then another babysitter, God's provision. I was a latchkey kid. We lived in Pasadena, California, and I would get off the school bus and I'd walk home, or I'd walk to her house if she was a school teacher, so she was available, so I'd walk to her house. And she just treated me as her own and cared for me, and that was God's provision. And then fast forward to way fast forward, we're jumping lots of years. So my husband and I are married. It's my 2nd marriage. I've struggled with infertility in my 1st marriage. My first husband had an affair, and God provided during that time too, when there were people who walked alongside me in my process of going through my divorce. It was a very difficult time, but God provided. So here's just one example. I journaled all the time during that. And there was a song that I kind of held on to. It wasn't sung in churches. It was a by a group called Out of the Gray, and it was called Hope in Sight. And I would listen to it over and over and over again. And I went to church on a Sunday morning shortly after my husband said that he was having an affair and he left. The worship team played that song. I just remember being flabbergasted because it was not a song that worship teams played. I couldn't believe it. I just sat there and cried, and I'm journaling like, "God, this is you. This is you." I there's no other explanation for that in my mind, because I'd never heard it sung in church before, and I'd gone to church all of my life. But to hear that was God's provision. So now fast forward to the infertility stuff. We adopted our kids, and it was during a time when adoption wasn't super trendy, like it seems to be kind of trendy the last few years, maybe 10, 15 years, adoption has become trendy. And I guess that's maybe not the best way to put it, but that's kind of how I've interpreted it. I was teaching at a public school and COVID hit. Well, prior to COVID hitting, I was teaching at this school, and there were 3 other teachers who had adopted kids. And I'd never had a group of people who were believers that adopted kids. Their kids were around my age within like a 5-year window. Some were a little bit older, some were a little bit younger. And I just was like, "Your kids are adopted? Are you kidding?" And so we had teaching in common, but then we had this bond of being adoptive parents, and it's different being an adoptive parent than a biological parent. I mean, I can say that I don't know what it's like to be a biological parent. I've never been pregnant. it just wasn't ever. It's not because I didn't have sex. I just never, I was never pregnant. Um, which that's a sidebar funny story for another time when I'm not being recorded. I'll tell you a funny story. If Sandra stops the recording, I'll tell you that. But anyway, that's Clarissa's going to have a great time editing this. Oh, sorry, Clarissa. So anyway, COVID hits, and one of those gals says in a group chat, "Would anyone be interested in having a Bible study?" And there were several of us that kind of hopped on this Bible study thing. And out of COVID came an example of God's provision. There were many, 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 many. But for me in my life, that experience of being forced to be off campus, we're teaching our students via Zoom, which is a whole nother thing that brought us community. But we had this Bible study and there was this connection. So we had the connectivity of being a teacher, the connectivity of being adoptive parents, and now we have the connectivity of being in a Bible study together and having the privilege of lifting each other up in prayer and coming together and encouraging each other. So then I'm also thinking of recently God's provision. And honestly, right now, I'm having a hard time. I've recently changed careers and I've moved into a counseling career from 29 years in education to having a sure income. I know God provided jobs, but there was part of me that's like, yeah, God's providing a job, but I'm doing all the work, which is arrogant. Um, so I've let go of my teaching career, which it was time. And yet I feel like I'm kind of holding on to it like a lifeline a little bit, just in case God doesn't provide, I can go back. So I'm in this in between of looking at God's provision. I can see where he's provided in the past. And what Joanna said today in the Bible study about he is the same God today as he was then. Why would I doubt that he's not going to provide for me? When I see in retrospect I can see God's provision. So here's another time where I'm looking for God's provision. My son recently said he has a partner, not in business. Um, and it makes me sick to my stomach and queasy and and sad. Just there's a huge sadness in my heart and I feel it in my gut when I think about my son. And I can't even go there to think about anything in the physical. I just think how sad it is. Just it's so overwhelmingly sad. And yet, God has provided people in my life who have walked that road with their kids or who are currently walking that road with their kids. And I'm thankful for his provision. I wish it wasn't in this circumstance, but it is. And I'm thankful that a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, I researched Cal Heal. That was God's provision. That wasn't anything of my own doing. It was God's provision, where I have like minded people, ladies who are walking out their salvation as unto the Lord, working that out in community and coming alongside each other. And as China says, walking each other home, and how we're not just walking it out, we're living it out, we're talking it out, we're crying it out, we're crying each other home, we're walking each other home, we're cheering each other home. That is God's provision. And I'm so grateful. And there's other things I could talk about, and I don't know how much time I've had. I didn't put up a timer or anything, but I wasn't planning on sharing today, and Sandra asked me, and I'm glad you did, Sandra, because it's another opportunity for God's provision, for me to be reminded of his provision. And if it's okay, I'd like to close in prayer. God, thank you. That doesn't even seem like the accurate words, but thank you for your provision in my life. For Nancy, who did my hair when I was 7 or 8, for Merlene, who took care of me so well and loved me so well, for my teacher friends, who I'm still close with, for the ladies in Cal Heal, for the other women in my life that have shown me what it's like to be a woman of God. I'm thankful. God, I confess that I'm struggling with trusting you to provide for us financially. God, I want to walk in your provision. Thank you for your love. I'm so grateful, God. I love you, Jesus. Bless this time, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen.